Hey, so glad you got here. We were totally waiting for you. Just about to listen to a story that drifts through quiet valleys, where the mist clings to old stones, where ravens seem to know secrets no one else remembers, and where a single bucket lowered into an ancient well might bring back something far stranger than gold. Not treasure, not glory. Just a memory you misplaced somewhere between childhood and old age, which, if you think about it, is both less convenient and somehow much more terrifying. Imagine spending years trying to remember where you left your favorite wooden spoon, only to discover the well would rather remind you of the first person who ever showed you kindness. Medieval magic had priorities that rarely matched anyone else's. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell everyone down in the comments where you're listening from and what the local hour is. It's always comforting to imagine these stories traveling farther than any wandering merchant ever could. Now settle in, get comfortable, and just relax. Today's tale starts like this. There was once a man named Aldrin who had become remarkably skilled at walking away, not from danger, although he had escaped enough of that over the years. Not from arguments either, though he had certainly discovered that most quarrels became someone else's problem if you quietly left before dawn. No, Aldrin had mastered walking away from places. He rarely remained in one village longer than a fortnight. He accepted small jobs, repairing fences, sharpening tools, carrying grain sacks, trimming hedges, or helping merchants guide overloaded carts through muddy roads. When the work ended, he thanked everyone politely, packed his worn cloak, and continued onward before anyone asked where he truly came from. The peculiar thing was that no answer ever felt entirely correct. He knew the names of kingdoms. He remembered dozens of roads. He could identify birds simply by hearing their morning songs. Yet whenever someone casually asked, "So where is home?" his mouth always hesitated, not because he wished to hide it, because no clear image arrived. He would eventually answer with something vague. "Oh, somewhere west." People usually nodded. In medieval villages, travelers often carried unusual silences. Nobody questioned them for long. One chilly autumn afternoon, Aldrin followed a narrow path between golden fields where the grain had already been harvested. Only the stubble remained, stretching across the hills like an enormous beard that someone had trimmed with very little enthusiasm. A pair of crows watched him from an old fence. One cawed, the other simply stared. Aldrin suspected the silent one was probably judging his boots. They deserved criticism. His boots had survived enough miles to qualify as experienced citizens. The air smelled of damp soil and distant wood smoke. Somewhere ahead, bells rang softly, calling farmers home before sunset. As the road curved around a hill, a village slowly emerged beneath the fading light. It was small, very small, the kind of place where everyone likely recognized every chicken individually. Stone cottages rested beneath thick, thatched roofs. Tiny gardens overflowed with onions, herbs, and late-season cabbages. Thin streams of smoke climbed lazily into the cooling sky. Everything seemed peaceful, yet something unusual caught Aldrin's attention almost immediately. Nobody hurried. Children walked slowly. Merchants unloaded wagons without rushing. Even the village dogs appeared strangely relaxed, as though they had collectively agreed. Barking required unnecessary effort. It felt less like laziness and more like certainty, as if everyone believed tomorrow would always arrive exactly when expected. Near the village center stood an ancient stone well. Nothing about its appearance suggested greatness. Its stones, were uneven. Moss covered much of its circular wall. The wooden roof leaned ever so slightly to one side, looking as though it had spent several decades reconsidering gravity. Even the rope seemed ordinary. Yet every villager who passed it did the same curious thing. They paused, only for a heartbeat. Some smiled. Others touched the stone gently. A few lowered their heads in quiet respect before continuing their day. Nobody explained why. Nobody gathered around it. Nobody drew water. They simply acknowledged it, like greeting an old friend. Aldrin found an elderly woman arranging baskets of apples outside her cottage. "Good evening," he said. She smiled warmly. "You've arrived before the fog." "I suppose that's fortunate." "It usually is." He glanced toward the well. "I noticed everyone greeting it." Her hands paused. "Oh." She looked toward the ancient stones with the same expression one might reserve for an aging grandparent. "You noticed." "I did. Most travelers ask about the church first. There isn't one." "Exactly." She chuckled quietly. Instead of explaining further, she handed Aldrin an apple. It was crisp, slightly tart, better than most apples he had eaten during weeks on the road. An eccentric local belief claimed that apples harvested after the first cold mist carried sweeter flesh because the trees became frightened of winter and hurried to finish their work. It made very little botanical sense, but the apples were undeniably delicious. "So," Aldrin asked carefully, "what makes the well so special?" The old woman became unusually thoughtful. "It doesn't grant wishes. I wasn't expecting it to. It doesn't heal sickness." "I see. It doesn't reveal the future. That's probably for the best." "Oh, certainly. People already worry enough about tomorrow." She brushed dirt from her apron. "What it returns," she hesitated, "is something you've forgotten." Aldrin laughed softly. "My memory forgets plenty. So does everyone's. I forget where I leave my spoon nearly every morning. The well has no interest in spoons." "What about hats?" "No." "My dignity? That disappears without magical assistance." He couldn't help smiling. "So it returns forgotten things? Forgotten memories." The smile lingered for a moment, then slowly faded. "What sort of memories?" "The ones that somehow slipped away. Everyone forgets childhood. Not like this." She lowered her voice. "Imagine remembering the smell of your mother's bread after believing that scent had vanished forever. A cool breeze stirred between the cottages. Imagine suddenly recalling your brother's laugh after 20 years of silence." Her eyes grew distant. "Imagine remembering someone's face, only to realize you had forgotten they ever existed." Neither spoke. The village seemed quieter now, not empty, simply listening. Aldrin looked back toward the old well. It appeared exactly as before. Crooked, moss-covered, entirely ordinary. Yet somehow its silence felt different. Heavy, patient, as though it had been waiting through generations without ever becoming lonely. "Has anyone drawn water today?" Aldrin asked. "Oh yes." "And?" "They remembered." "What did they remember?" She smiled gently. "That belongs to them." The answer settled into the evening air like falling leaves. No one in the village appeared eager to boast about recovered memories. There were no excited crowds, no triumphant celebrations, only peaceful faces moving through familiar routines. Whatever the well offered, people treated it with unusual privacy. That intrigued Aldrin far more than any miracle, because genuine mysteries rarely announce themselves. They simply waited until someone curious wandered close enough to notice. As dusk settled over the rooftops, the first faint strands of mist drifted across the fields beyond the cottages. The old woman gathered her baskets. "You'll stay the night?" "If there's room." "There always is." "And tomorrow?" She glanced once more toward the ancient stones. "Tomorrow, if the well wishes. Perhaps you'll remember why roads have never felt like home." Those words lingered with Aldrin. Long after darkness embraced the quiet village, while the old well rested beneath the stars, saying nothing at all, its silence, somehow, felt older than memory itself. Morning arrived quietly, as though dawn itself had decided not to disturb the village too abruptly. A thin veil of mist drifted across the fields before surrendering to the gentle warmth of the rising sun. Roosters crowed with the confidence of tiny kings, announcing victories nobody had questioned. Somewhere nearby, a goat objected loudly to the entire concept of mornings, which was perhaps the most reasonable opinion anyone expressed before breakfast. Aldrin awoke on a straw mattress in the spare loft of a cooper's house. The room was simple: a narrow window overlooking the village square, a wooden stool missing one leg but somehow still functional, and a blanket woven with faded blue threads that had probably been bright decades earlier. He dressed, stretched the stiffness from another night on unfamiliar bedding, and stepped outside. The village was already awake. Women swept doorsteps. Children chased one another between cottages. A blacksmith hammered glowing iron with patient, measured strikes that echoed softly across the square. Nothing appeared extraordinary, and yet every face carried that same curious calm. He had noticed the evening before. It was not happiness exactly, nor was it solemnity. It resembled the expression of someone who had finally remembered the last line of a song after humming it incorrectly for years. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the morning air. Aldrin followed it with the dedication of a pilgrim seeking enlightenment. Few forces in the world rival the persuasive power of warm bread. Inside the village bakery, loaves rested upon wooden shelves while flour floated lazily through shafts of sunlight. The baker, a broad-shouldered man with a beard, impressive enough to shelter small birds, greeted him cheerfully. "You must be the traveler." "I seem to be." "Good. Travelers eat more than locals." "Is that good for business?" "It keeps me from having conversations with my own Tao." Aldrin considered that. "I've met people less interesting than Tao." "So have I." The baker laughed and placed a fresh loaf onto the counter, as Aldrin accepted a thick slice. Still warm from the oven, he noticed a young woman sitting quietly near the doorway. She couldn't have been more than 20 summers old. Her hands rested around a wooden cup of herb tea. Her eyes, however, seemed fixed on something far away. Not outside, somewhere inside herself. The baker lowered his voice. "She visited the well yesterday." Aldrin glanced toward her. "And?" She remembered. He waited. The baker did not continue. Instead, he simply sliced another loaf. Finally, Aldrin asked, "Remembered what?" The baker smiled politely. "You'll have to ask her." It became increasingly clear that this village considered another person's memories as private as their prayers. That Aldrin respected. After thanking the baker, he carried his breakfast into the square. The ancient well stood exactly where it had the previous evening. Children played around it without climbing upon its stone rim. Adults walked past with quiet nods. No one treated it carelessly, yet no one feared it either. It occupied the center of village life with remarkable humility. An old man lowered a bucket into the well. The rope creaked softly. Water splashed somewhere below. He filled 2 wooden pails, balanced them across his shoulders, and walked away. Nothing miraculous occurred. No glowing light, no mysterious voices, no dramatic gust of wind, just water. Aldrin frowned slightly. Perhaps the stories had grown with each generation. Villages possessed remarkable talents for polishing ordinary events until they sparkled like legends. He had nearly convinced himself of exactly that when he noticed the young woman from the bakery approaching the well. She moved slowly, almost reluctantly. She placed one hand upon the ancient stone, closed her eyes, and simply stood there. Several moments passed. Then she smiled, not broadly, not dramatically, just enough for tears to gather quietly in the corners of her eyes. She whispered something too soft to hear. When she opened her eyes again, she looked lighter, as though she had been carrying an invisible bundle that someone had finally lifted from her shoulders. Curiosity overcame politeness. As she turned to leave, Aldrin stepped beside her. "I hope I'm not intruding." She studied him for a moment before answering. "You're the traveler." "I am. You've been staring at the well since yesterday." "I've tried to do it discreetly." "You haven't," he sighed. "I feared as much." The faintest smile crossed her face. "My name is Elswith. Aldrin." They walked together toward the edge of the square. "I heard you visited the well yesterday," he said carefully. "I did." "And it truly," she nodded before he finished. "Yes." "What happened?" Elswith looked toward a nearby orchard where apples swayed gently in the breeze. "For years," she said, "I believed I had only one lullaby from my mother." She folded her hands together. "The one everyone remembers." A pause. "But yesterday," another pause. "I heard another." Aldrin remained silent. "It wasn't merely the words," she continued. "It was her voice." Her expression softened. "I remembered how she used to hum while braiding my hair." A small laugh escaped her. She always forgot the last verse and invented a different ending every time. She wiped at one eye. "I had forgotten that." Her voice trembled ever so slightly. "I forgot the sound of her laughter between verses." The morning breeze carried the scent of rosemary from someone's garden. "I thought losing those memories happened naturally," she said. "I believed time simply wore them away. And now? Now I know they were never gone." She touched her temple gently. "They were merely waiting." Aldrin felt an unexpected ache in his chest, not because of her story, because he wondered what parts of his own life might be waiting somewhere beyond reach. How many smiles had vanished? How many names? How many promises? He suddenly realized something unsettling. He could picture dozens of villages, hundreds of roads, countless strangers. Yet when he attempted to remember his own father's face, nothing arrived. Only emptiness, not even uncertainty, simply blankness. He stopped walking. Elswith noticed immediately. "You've thought of someone." His voice caught. "I can't remember my father's face." She regarded him with quiet understanding. "Did you once?" "I must have." "You don't know?" "I don't even know when I stopped remembering." Those words sounded strange spoken aloud, like discovering a hole in one's cloak that had somehow escaped notice through an entire winter. Elswith looked toward the well. "It begins like that." "What does?" "The wondering." She smiled sadly. "Most people don't come seeking forgotten memories. They come after realizing something important has already disappeared." A pair of swallows darted overhead, chasing invisible insects through the brightening sky. For a long while, neither spoke. Eventually, Elswith broke the silence. "My grandfather used to tell me something peculiar." "What was that?" "He claimed memories are like cats." Aldrin blinked. "Cats? They disappear whenever they please." "That seems accurate. But if you sit quietly enough..." she smiled. Sometimes they come home on their own. He chuckled. I've known cats less mysterious than people. Most cats would consider that a compliment. As they returned toward the square, voices rose near the well. A small crowd had gathered, not in alarm, but in gentle surprise. An elderly shepherd stood motionless beside the ancient stones. His weathered hands trembled. One of his sheep, apparently convinced crowds always indicated food, wandered confidently into the middle of everyone and began chewing someone's cloak. The owner sighed with the exhausted patience of a person who had lost this particular argument many times before. The shepherd, however, noticed nothing. Tears streamed freely down his face. His daughter stepped beside him. "Father?" Very slowly, he looked at her. Then he whispered words barely louder than the wind. "I remember your mother." The daughter froze. "What?" "I remember." His voice broke. The freckles across her nose. Silence settled over the square. "I had forgotten them." He laughed softly through his tears. "All these years, I remembered her eyes, her hair, but not the freckles." He covered his face with trembling hands. They returned. His daughter embraced him tightly. No one applauded. No one spoke. The villagers quietly lowered their eyes, granting the old man dignity in his joy. Aldrin watched the embrace with an emotion he could not entirely name. Hope, perhaps, or longing. For the first time in many years, the road ahead no longer seemed as interesting as the place where he stood. He found himself looking once more at the weathered stones of the old well, not with disbelief, not even with curiosity alone, but with the growing realization that somewhere beneath those still waters might rest pieces of himself he had never known were missing. And that possibility was both comforting and deeply unsettling. The rest of that morning passed with remarkable normality, which somehow made the extraordinary feel even heavier. A woman argued with her stubborn donkey because it refused to cross a puddle no wider than a boot. The donkey, displaying the unwavering confidence for which donkeys have been famous since time itself, stood perfectly still and stared back as though considering the argument beneath its dignity. A pair of children attempted to convince a flock of geese that they had discovered a secret language consisting entirely of whistles. The geese remained unconvinced. Aldrin privately suspected the geese were correct. Life continued. Bread was baked, wood was chopped, water was drawn. And in the center of it all stood the ancient well, quiet as ever. It was almost disappointing. He had expected mystery to announce itself with thunder or strange lights. Instead, it waited with the patience of old stone. By midday, the cooper who had offered him lodging found him repairing the loose hinge on a garden gate. "You've steady hands," the older man observed. "They've had plenty of practice." "You've fixed many gates?" "Gates, roofs, carts. Once an entire chicken coop that collapsed because someone believed 4 nails were enough." "Were they?" "They were not." The cooper nodded gravely. "That explains many chicken-related tragedies." Aldrin smiled. There was something comforting about conversations that wandered nowhere important. Yet his thoughts repeatedly drifted back toward the well. The cooper noticed. "You keep looking." "I suppose I do." "Thinking about visiting?" "I haven't decided." The old craftsman leaned against the fence. "Few people decide quickly." "Are they afraid?" "Sometimes." "Should they be?" The cooper scratched his gray beard. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether they're prepared to meet someone they used to be." That answer lingered between them. It was not frightening. Not exactly, merely honest. The afternoon sun warmed the village while gentle breezes carried the scent of drying herbs hanging beneath cottage eaves. Bundles of thyme, sage, lavender, and rosemary swayed softly overhead. A curious custom in this region held that herbs dried during a waxing moon kept their fragrance longer through winter. Whether the moon deserved any credit remained uncertain, but nearly every household followed the tradition without question. Some habits survived not because anyone proved them true, but because generations agreed they felt right. Aldrin had always liked customs like that. They gave ordinary days a quiet rhythm. Later, while carrying a stack of freshly split firewood, he noticed a small boy sitting beside the well. Unlike everyone else, the child wasn't watching the water. He was watching the sky. "What are you looking for?" Aldrin asked. The boy answered without turning. "My memory." Aldrin nearly laughed before realizing the child was completely serious. "You misplaced it in the clouds?" "No." The boy frowned thoughtfully. "Grandmother says memories fly around before they land." "Does she?" "She says happy ones fly like swallows." "And sad ones?" "They walk." Aldrin raised an eyebrow. "They walk?" "They're slower." The explanation possessed the flawless certainty that only children and very old storytellers ever achieved. "What memory are you waiting for?" "My first puppy." "You forgot your puppy?" "I was only 3. "I see. My sister remembers him." "And you don't?" The boy shook his head. "I remember his tail." "Only his tail?" "It wagged a lot." Aldrin sat beside him. For several minutes they watched clouds drift lazily above the rooftops. Finally, the boy asked, "Did you lose memories too?" The question arrived so naturally that Aldrin answered before thinking. "I believe I did." "Are you sad?" "I don't know yet. My grandmother says people become sad only after they discover what they were missing." Children had an unsettling habit of stumbling into wisdom while believing they were discussing puppies. Before Aldrin could respond, an elderly voice called from behind. "There you are." A woman approached carrying a basket filled with freshly washed linens. Her silver hair was neatly braided beneath a simple linen scarf. Her smile reached her eyes before it reached her lips. The little boy sprang to his feet. "Grandmother! So this poor traveler has been trapped in conversation with you?" "I was helping." "Were you?" "I explained memories." She laughed. "I'm certain you improved the subject." The boy scampered away toward another group of children. The old woman remained. "My grandson asks impossible questions. He also gives impossible answers. They're often the same thing." She introduced herself as Marta. Together they strolled slowly around the square. "You've been speaking with many people," she observed. "I'm trying to understand the well." "No," she smiled kindly. "You're trying to understand yourself." Aldrin couldn't argue. They passed beneath an ancient oak tree whose roots pushed gently through the packed earth like sleeping serpents. Birdsong echoed overhead. Somewhere nearby, someone practiced a wooden flute, not especially well. The tune wandered in circles before apparently giving up and becoming something else entirely. "Tell me," Marta said, "when you think about your childhood, what comes first?" Aldrin closed his eyes. "A river." "Good. A little bridge." She nodded. "Go on." "I remember. Fishing." "With whom?" Silence. He searched. "Nothing." "I don't know." "What did they look like?" Again. Nothing. Only the bridge remained. The river. The sound of moving water. Everything else dissolved like mist beneath sunlight. His chest tightened. "I can't see anyone." "You weren't alone." "I know." "How?" "Because..." He frowned. "Because someone laughed." Whose laugh? I don't know. The answer left him strangely breathless. How could a memory preserve laughter but erase the face that produced it? Marta watched him with gentle patience. The mind is peculiar. I've noticed. It protects us in ways we rarely understand. By making us forget. Sometimes. She rested one hand upon the rough bark of the oak. Sometimes forgetting happens because life is long. And sometimes because the heart hides what it cannot carry. Neither possibility comforted him. The afternoon stretched onward. Shadows slowly lengthened across the square. Eventually, a bell rang. Not from a church, since the village had none, but from the blacksmith's forge. The sound marked the end of the day's labor. People began gathering near the well, not in crowds, simply passing by, one after another. A young mother touched the stone before leading her daughter home. An elderly couple paused together, smiling quietly, without speaking. A shepherd removed his cap for a brief moment. Each gesture lasted only seconds, yet everyone carried the same quiet reverence. Aldrin finally asked Marta, "Has the well always been here?" "As long as anyone remembers." He couldn't help noticing the wording. "As long as anyone remembers," she chuckled softly. Perhaps that's not the best phrase. Or perhaps it's exactly the right one. She looked toward the moss-covered stones. My grandmother claimed the well was already ancient when her grandmother was a little girl. No one knows who built it? There are stories. I suspected there might be. There are always stories. Which one do you believe? She became thoughtful. The oldest. And what does it say? That the well was never meant to give memories back. Aldrin looked at her sharply. It wasn't? No. What was it meant to do? Before she could answer, voices rose gently across the square. The villagers stepped aside as a bent old man slowly approached the well. He leaned heavily upon an ash-wood staff polished smooth by decades of use. His beard reached nearly to his belt. Unlike the others, every person greeted him first before acknowledging the well. Children bowed politely. Adults smiled with unmistakable respect. Even the dogs seemed to settle quietly as he passed. "Who is he?" Aldrin whispered. Marta lowered her voice. "That." She watched the old man rest one weathered hand upon the ancient stone. "It is the one who keeps the stories." The old man stood silently beside the well for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he lifted his gaze. Across the crowded square, his eyes met Aldrin's, and he smiled as though he had been expecting the traveler all along. The old man's smile was not cheerful exactly. It was worse. It was knowing. Aldrin had always distrusted knowing smiles. They usually belonged to people about to say something deeply inconvenient, like, "I expected you," or "the prophecy spoke of this," or "that mule you borrowed belongs to the reeve." Of the three, the mule situation was often the most immediately dangerous. The villagers drifted away from the square, leaving only a few quiet voices behind. Smoke curled from cottage chimneys. The evening light turned the rooftops copper gold, and the well sat in the center of it all, gathering shadows around its stones. Marta gave Aldrin a gentle nod. "You should speak with him." "Should I?" "Probably not." "That's comforting." "But you will." She smiled, adjusted the basket on her hip, and walked away before he could ask anything else. The old man remained beside the well, leaning on his staff. Aldrin approached slowly. "You are the traveler," the old man said. "So everyone keeps telling me. It is easier than calling you the man who stares at stones." "Fair," the old man chuckled. "My name is Auric." "Aldrin." "Yes," Aldrin frowned. "Yes?" "Yes." That is the name you use. The air cooled. Somewhere, a shutter tapped softly against a wall. Aldrin tried to answer lightly. I've had it for some time. Most names are like borrowed cloaks, Oryx said. They keep us warm until we remember what they were meant to cover. People here speak in riddles more often than necessary. Only around wells. That makes it better? Not at all. Oryx gestured toward a low stone bench beneath the oak tree, and they sat together facing the well. For a while, neither spoke. Aldrin noticed carvings along the well's lower stones. They were almost hidden beneath moss. Tiny circles, wave shapes, and marks resembling closed eyes. Those symbols, Aldrin said. Who made them? No one knows. Convenient answer. Convenient because it is true. Oryx tapped his staff lightly against the ground. Long ago, people came here not to remember, but to forget properly. Aldrin looked at him. Properly? Yes. There is forgetting that heals, and forgetting that steals. The old ones knew the difference better than we do. The phrase settled strangely in Aldrin's mind. Forgetting that heals. Forgetting that steals. He thought of the river from his childhood. The bridge. The laugh with no face attached. How can forgetting heal? Oryx's gaze remained on the well. When grief is too sharp, the heart wraps cloth around it, not to deny the blade, only to keep the hand from bleeding every time it touches the memory. And stealing? When time, fear, pride, or sorrow takes more than it should. Aldrin leaned forward. And the well knows the difference? No. That surprised him. No? The well is water and stone and whatever old kindness was placed within it. But knowing, judging, those are human burdens. The well only reflects what is sunk deepest. A breeze moved through the oak leaves. Their whisper sounded almost like distant rain. Oryx told him that the village had once stood farther down the valley, near marshland, where white reeds grew taller than men. A fever had swept through in a summer so wet that bread molded before it cooled. The people who survived climbed to higher ground and built again around the spring that fed the well. At first, they drew ordinary water. Then an old widow lowered a bucket and, upon drinking, remembered the exact words her husband had spoken the day they first met. She laughed so loudly that neighbors believed she had swallowed a frog. Medieval medicine, being medieval medicine, offered three explanations: bad air, moon imbalance, or frogs. Frogs were blamed for an impressive range of symptoms. After her came a farmer who remembered where his father had hidden seed grain during a famine. Then a midwife remembered a birthing song from her grandmother's tongue. Then children began recalling games no one had taught them. The village did not become rich. It became rooted. Memories returned like birds finding old rafters, Oryx said. Aldrin looked at the well. Why here? Oryx smiled faintly. That is the question everyone asks first. And the answer? Buried beneath stories. Then tell me the stories. 3 are common. One says a saint wept here after losing the names of the dead. One says a queen once threw her crown into the spring, so the land would remember her mercy instead of her wars. One says the well is fed by an underground river that passes through the dreams of sleeping ancestors. Which is true? Probably none. Helpful. But all truth wears costumes when it grows old. Aldrin exhaled a soft laugh despite himself. The old man reached into a pouch at his belt and removed a small object, a smooth black pebble marked with a pale stripe. When I was a boy, Oryx said. Yet Aldrin felt the world narrowing toward the well. What happens if I drink from it? He asked. Oryx took back the pebble and slipped it into his pouch. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps? Perhaps you remember something sweet. And if it is not sweet, then you sit with it until it stops being a stranger. The answer was calm. Too calm. Aldrin swallowed. My mother gave me this and told me never to drop it into the well. Why? Because some things are anchors. He placed the pebble in Aldrin's palm. It was warm from his hand. The village keeps such objects: buttons, beads, scraps of ribbon, bits of bone, a cracked comb, a child's carved horse, things tied to memories. We do not worship them. We remember through them. Then why use the well? Oric's expression darkened slightly. Because people grow careless. They believe memory lives safely in the mind. It does not. It lives in hands, songs, recipes, scars, nicknames, footsteps, arguments, and the ridiculous way someone cuts cheese too thick every single time. Aldrin stared at him. Cheese? A deeply underestimated vessel of remembrance. Naturally, a dog wandered near them, sneezed twice, and trotted away as though embarrassed by its own participation. Oric continued. When people stop telling stories, the well stirs. When families bury names out of shame, the water grows cold. When old songs are mocked into silence, the bucket grows heavy. Aldrin glanced toward the dark circle beneath the wooden roof. So the well returns what the village fails to carry. Sometimes, and sometimes to strangers. Strangers are only people whose stories have not reached us yet. The words felt gentle, but Aldrin heard something beneath them. An invitation, or a warning. He asked, "Do you think I came here by chance?" Oric studied him. No one arrives anywhere entirely by chance, but do not let that make you dramatic. Even destiny has to use muddy roads. Aldrin smiled. Above them, the first stars appeared. The village settled into evening sounds. Bowls set upon tables, doors closing, quiet laughter, sheep complaining from their pens as if personally offended by fences. What if I remember something I was meant to forget? Oric's eyes softened. Then you must decide whether it was mercy or theft. The well stood silent beneath the deepening sky. For the first time, Aldrin thought he heard water moving far below, though no bucket had been lowered and no hand touched the rope. It sounded like a whisper, not words, not yet, only the faint, patient murmur of something old turning in its sleep. Aldrin did not drink from the well that night. He told himself this was wisdom. In truth, it was fear wearing a respectable cloak. Instead, he slept badly in the cooper's loft, listening to the village breathe beneath the dark. Rafters creaked, mice whispered private scandals in the walls. Somewhere outside, an owl called with the gloomy confidence of a creature that had never paid rent and still judged everyone. By dawn, Aldrin had made a decision. Not the brave decision. The other one. He would leave. He packed his cloak, fastened his belt, checked the small knife at his side, and descended the ladder before the cooper's household stirred. The village square lay pale beneath morning mist. The well was only a darker shape at its center. Aldrin crossed the square without looking at it. That, he discovered, was difficult. Not because the well called aloud, it did not. The problem was that silence can sometimes follow a person more closely than sound. He had almost reached the northern path when a voice said, "Leaving before breakfast is suspicious behavior." Aldrin stopped. Oric sat on a low wall beside the road, wrapped in a brown cloak, staff across his knees. "You wait in strange places," Aldrin said. "I am old. Wherever I sit becomes a waiting place. I have work elsewhere." "No, you don't. I might. You might also become king of goats, but we should plan according to likelihood." Aldrin sighed. "Do you speak plainly at all?" "Only when confused. Auric rose slowly, bones protesting with tiny cracks. I won't stop you. Good. But if you leave now, you will keep walking until every road looks like the same road. Aldrin's hand tightened around the strap of his pack. You don't know that. I know the shape of running. I'm not running. Of course, you're traveling aggressively. The old man began walking toward the eastern edge of the village, not toward the well. After a moment, Aldrin followed. They passed gardens silvered with dew and entered a narrow lane bordered by hazel bushes. Beyond the cottages stood a small grove where ribbons, beads, and scraps of cloth hung from branches. None were bright. Most had faded from years of weather. What is this place? Aldrin asked. Where we keep what must not be placed in the well. The branches stirred gently. A cracked wooden spoon hung from one twig. A little brass bell, a child's shoe, a strip of blue wool embroidered with clumsy stars. Aldrin touched nothing. The grove felt tender, like stepping quietly into someone else's grief. Auric pointed to an iron key suspended by red thread. That belonged to a woman who forgot why she hated her sister. Forgot hatred? Yes, wonderful improvement, everyone thought. Then she remembered the sister had stolen her dowry and left her hungry for 3 winters. Less wonderful. Indeed, memory is not polite enough to return only what flatters us. They continued deeper between the trees. At the grove's center stood a flat stone covered with small objects, buttons, rings, beads, carved animal figures. A single feather weighted beneath a pebble. Auric rested both hands on his staff. I keep these. You're the guardian. I keep stories, not gates. That sounds like a guardian. It sounds like unpaid labor. Aldrin almost smiled. What exactly do you do? When someone remembers, I listen if they wish to speak. When someone wishes to forget again, I warn them they cannot choose cleanly. When someone comes too often, I send them to chop wood until their thoughts behave. Does that work? Almost never, but the woodpile benefits. Aldrin looked around the grove. And your own memory? Auric's face changed. Not dramatically. Only enough for Aldrin to notice the humor retreating. My own memory is why I serve. The old man took a leather cord from beneath his tunic. Hanging from it was a small blank disc of bone. No carving, no mark. When I was young, Auric said, I believed the well should be studied. That seems reasonable. I believed everything could be understood if one asked enough questions. Still reasonable. I believed the past belonged to whoever was clever enough to retrieve it. Less reasonable. Ah, you improve quickly. A faint smile flickered and vanished. I drew from the well every full moon for 3 years. Aldrin stared. Why? Greed, though I called it devotion. People often dress greed in better clothes. What did you remember? Too much. The names of great-grandmothers. Winter storms before my birth. Songs sung by men whose bones were dust. Arguments at tables I had never seen. How? The well does not always return only yours. That sentence chilled the morning. Aldrin thought of Elswith remembering her mother's song, the shepherd remembering Freckles, the child waiting for a puppy. What happened? Auric turned the blank bone disc between his fingers. One night I asked for the first memory ever given to me. And I received a woman's face bending over me. Warm hands. A voice calling me by a name. Your mother? Perhaps. Perhaps? Auric looked at him. I remembered her face, but lost my own name. The grove fell utterly still. Even the birds seemed to pause. You mean Auric isn't... No. What was your name? I don't know. Aldrin felt the ground beneath that answer. Not dramatic, not magical, just absence. A hole with an old man standing carefully around it. Can the well return it? I have never asked. Why not? Because some losses become pillars. Pull them out carelessly, and the roof falls. Aldrin didn't understand fully, but something in him recognized the shape of the warning. Auric continued softly. The village needed someone who knew the danger of hunger, not hunger for bread. Hunger for what was missing. I was suited. Because you lost yourself. Because I learned a person is not only his name. The old man touched the blank disc, but I won't pretend it does not ache. A strange custom, Auric explained, had grown from his loss. Whenever a child in the village was named, the family whispered the name 3 times into a bowl of water before speaking it aloud. The first whisper was for the child, the second for the ancestors, and the third for any forgotten name still wandering without a mouth. It was odd. It was gentle. It was exactly the sort of custom that sounded foolish until grief made it beautiful. Aldrin breathed slowly. So when you said Aldrin is the name I use, I meant no cruelty. Do you know another? No. Does the well? Perhaps. The word stood between them like a closed door. Aldrin looked back through the trees toward the village. The well was hidden from sight, yet he felt its presence all the same. What is its true purpose? He asked. Auric smiled sadly. And rain, waiting somewhere, beyond the hills. Aldrin stood beside the well. No one pushed him forward. No one watched too closely. That kindness made it harder. Auric sat beneath the oak tree, carving nothing in particular from a piece of wood. Marta passed by with a basket and touched Aldrin's sleeve once, lightly, then continued, without a word. Aldrin placed both hands on the stone rim. Balance. Between remembering and forgetting? Yes. Between carrying and laying down. Between honoring the dead and allowing the living to breathe. And if people take too much, then memory becomes a feast where everyone eats until they are sick. That is a terrible image. It is accurate. Also why one should never trust a monk near plum pudding. Aldrin laughed once, quietly. Then silence returned. Auric placed the blank disc beneath his tunic again. You came here hollow in places you cannot see. That sounds unpleasant. Most truths do. What should I do? For today, stay. And tomorrow, wake up. And after that? Perhaps ask the well one honest question. Aldrin looked at the faded ribbons moving softly among the branches. One honest question. Not what have I lost? That was too wide. Not who am I? Too dangerous. Perhaps only this. What memory has kept me walking? The thought made his chest tighten. Auric began leading him back toward the village. As they stepped from the grove, sunlight broke through the mist and touched the roofs with gold. The well waited in the square, quiet beneath its leaning wooden cover. Aldrin did not approach it, not yet. But this time, when he looked at it, he did not look away. That day, Aldrin stayed, not heroically. He simply failed to leave, which is how many important decisions disguise themselves. He helped the cooper mend barrel hoops, carried kindling for Marta, thin as a willow switch, with dark curls and a gap between his front teeth. The boy held up a fish barely longer than his thumb. A monster, the boy declared. Aldrin heard his own child voice reply, That is not a monster. It is if you are a worm. The older boy bowed to the fish with grand ceremony, then slipped it back into the river. Aldrin felt the warmth of that day, mud between his toes. and spent half an hour retrieving a hen from a rooftop after it had apparently decided elevation improved its social standing. The hen disagreed loudly with being rescued. Aldrin had known knights less committed to defending questionable positions. By late afternoon, the village settled into a soft golden hush. Smoke rose straight from chimneys. The air smelled of hay, onions. It was cold. Not winter cold. Deep earth cold. The kind of cold that felt as though it had never known sunlight and had no plans to start now. He looked down. The shaft descended into darkness. Far below, water reflected a pale circle of sky. "What do I ask?" he whispered. No answer came, which was rude, considering the well had built quite a reputation on mystery. He closed his eyes. What memory has kept me walking? The question formed silently, not spoken aloud, yet it seemed to fall from him like a pebble. He lowered the bucket. The rope rasped against the worn beam. Down, 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 a splash. He drew it back slowly, arm over arm. The bucket emerged, brimming with water, so clear it seemed almost absent. He dipped his hands, drank. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the village vanished. He was small. That was the first truth. His hands were not weathered but soft, dirty at the knuckles, clutching a reed fishing pole. Sunlight glittered on a river. The little bridge from his memory arched nearby, made of uneven planks and stubborn optimism. Someone laughed beside him. This time, the sound had a shape. A boy, older than Aldrin. By perhaps 3 summers, the smell of reeds, the sweet rot of fallen leaves near the bank. The boy turned. His face was bright. His eyes were kind. "Come on, Wren," he said. "Before Father notices we stole the line." Wren, not Aldrin. Wren. The memory shifted. Evening now. A cottage doorway. A woman singing somewhere inside. The older boy tugged Aldrin's sleeve. "Don't tell about the fishing line. You stole it. We borrowed it badly. That is stealing. That is vocabulary." Aldrin, small Wren, laughed until his stomach hurt. Then a man's shadow filled the doorway. Large hands, a deep voice, not angry, amused. "So," the man said, "my fishing line returned wetter than usual." The older boy stepped forward at once. "My fault." The man crouched. His face remained blurred, not gone, but veiled, as if mist moved across it. Aldrin reached inward, desperate. "Father, let me see." The memory trembled. The man touched the older boy's hair, then Aldrin's. "No harm done," he said. "But next time, steal the old line. It misses adventure." The warmth of that hand on Aldrin's head struck harder than any blade. The scene changed again. Rain. His gap-toothed grin, his ridiculous fish, his brave lie. I always follow Wren, but he had not followed. Or perhaps he had tried. Aldrin did not know which possibility hurt more. The villagers continued their evening routines around him, not because they were careless, but because grief was allowed to sit among ordinary things here. Bread still needed cutting. Goats still needed scolding. Cold rain. A road churned into mud. People shouting. A wagon wheel broken. The older boy stood in front of Aldrin, no longer laughing. His dark curls were plastered against his face. "Run when I say," he whispered. Aldrin tried to understand. Behind them, men argued. Not soldiers, not exactly. Desperate men, hungry men. One held a rusted spear, another clutched a sack of grain. The older boy pushed something into Aldrin's hand, the black pebble with the pale stripe. "No, not Oryx pebble, one like it." "Keep it," the boy said. "What about you?" "I'll follow." "You promise?" The boy smiled, a frightened smile pretending to be brave. the most dangerous kind. "I always follow, Wren." Thunder cracked. Someone shouted. The boy shoved him toward the trees. "Now!" Aldrin ran. Branches tore at his face. Mud sucked at his feet. Behind him came shouting, then a cry, then nothing he could name. The memory blurred violently, as though some merciful hand had smeared water across painted glass. Then he was older, not much older, walking alone, the pebble gone from his hand, the name Wren buried beneath Aldrin, his brother's face fading, his father's face fading. The cottage fading, everything folding inward until only roads remained. Aldrin stumbled back from the well, gasping. The bucket tipped, spilling clear water across the stones. Auric was beside him before he fell. "Breathe," Aldrin gripped the old man's sleeve. "I had a brother." Auric said nothing. "I had a brother." The words broke apart inside him. Marta came too, quiet and steady, placing a wool cloak around his shoulders, though the air was not cold. Aldrin looked at Auric. "His name—" He stopped. Panic opened under him. "I don't know his name." "You remembered his face," Auric said gently, "but not his name. Sometimes the door opens only partway." "That is cruel." "Yes." The honesty almost helped. Aldrin pressed both palms against his eyes. The boy's laughter remained. Children still needed reminding that beetles were not appropriate guests at supper, no matter how politely introduced. Auric guided Aldrin to the bench beneath the oak. "What you saw," the old man said, "is yours, but it may not be complete. I left him. You were a child. I ran. You obeyed him. That sounds prettier. It is also true." Aldrin looked toward the spilled water darkening the stones. "Why would I forget him?" Marta answered softly. "Because remembering might have stopped you from surviving." The sentence landed gently, too gently. Aldrin hated it. He wanted blame. Blame had edges. Blame could be held. This was softer, and therefore harder, to push away. An eccentric belief among nearby hillfolk claimed that names forgotten during storms were carried into thunderheads and returned only when someone slept through rain without fear. It sounded like nonsense, naturally. But that night, as clouds gathered above the village, Aldrin wondered whether some part of his brother's name had truly gone wandering through weather, waiting for a quiet enough heart to hear it again. By dusk he could stand. The memory remained raw, but real. He had not been born on roads. He had not always been alone. Someone had called him Wren. Someone had laughed beside him at the river. Someone had stood between him and danger. That did not answer who Aldrin was now, but it changed the silence behind him. For years, he had believed emptiness meant nothing had been there. Now he understood. Emptiness could be a covered well, deep, dark, and still holding water. By the next morning, everyone knew Aldrin had remembered something. Nobody asked what. That was perhaps the kindest thing about the village, and also slightly maddening. In most places, news traveled faster than spilled ale across a tilted table. Here, curiosity existed, certainly, but it wore soft shoes and waited outside the door. Aldrin spent the early hours helping hang garlands across the square for the autumn feast. It was not a grand festival. No lords arrived, no trumpets sounded, no dramatic banners snapped in the wind. It was mostly villagers carrying tables, arguing gently over where benches should go, and discovering that every single household believed its stew pot deserved the warmest place near the fire. Medieval feasts were less like polished ceremonies and more like organized chaos with onions. Elswith joined him near the oak tree, tying bundles of dried herbs with twine. "You look terrible," she said. "Good morning to you as well. I mean gently terrible. That softens it. A little." He smiled faintly. She did not press him. Instead, she handed him rosemary. "For the lamb. I thought this was for decoration. It can be both. Beauty first, flavor later. That is how half of village life survives." By midday, long tables filled the square. Fresh bread cooled beneath linen cloths. Cheese wheels appeared from cellars like pale moons. Apples were piled in baskets. Clay jugs of small ale waited under the shade. The well stood at the center, not decorated exactly, but honored. Someone had brushed away the moss from its upper stones. Someone else placed a simple wreath of rowan leaves near the base. No one made a speech. The village simply gathered. Oryx sat at one end of the longest table, wrapped in his brown cloak, looking both ancient and hungry. Marta supervised children carrying wooden bowls, which mostly meant preventing them from wearing the bowls as helmets. One boy still managed it briefly and looked extremely proud, as conquerors often do. Then the singing began. At first, Aldrin barely noticed. An old woman hummed while stirring a pot. A baker joined with a low harmony. Then a shepherd added words, and suddenly half the square was singing a tune that seemed to rise from the stones themselves. Elswith froze. "That song," she whispered. "You know it?" "No," but tears gathered in her eyes. "I mean, I do now." Across the square, others had gone still too. Marta's mouth opened in wonder. A younger man near the bread table laughed aloud. "My grandmother used to clap on that part." "Mine too," someone answered. "No, not there. After the turn." Another voice joined. Then, another. The song reshaped itself as it moved from mouth to mouth. Forgotten verses returned unevenly, like shy guests arriving late. Some villagers knew lines no one else remembered. Some carried only a rhythm tapped on the table. One child sang a nonsense refrain, so confidently that everyone accepted it, which was exactly how many ancient traditions probably began. Oryx listened with his eyes closed. Aldrin felt the melody move through him, not familiar, not his, yet comforting. The feast unfolded around recovered fragments. A woman brought out a dish no one had tasted in years, barley cakes cooked with honey, fennel, and crushed walnuts. She had remembered the recipe after drawing water the previous spring. Though she confessed, she had first mistaken fennel for nettle and produced something memorable in the wrong direction. The baker revealed that the village once marked the first frost by pressing thumbprints into loaves before baking them. One print for each absent loved one. The custom had vanished after a hard winter generations before. Now by evening, nearly every loaf bore small dents across its crust. Children found this hilarious. Adults pretended not to. Aldrin pressed one thumb into a round loaf and thought of a boy holding up a tiny fish. No name came, only warmth and grief. But grief, he discovered, did not always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it sat beside you politely and shared bread. As dusk deepened, the feast became livelier. Fiddles appeared, a drum joined. Someone produced a reed pipe and played with great enthusiasm and uncertain accuracy. The village accepted both. Dancing began near the well, not courtly dancing, nothing elegant. This was stomping, clapping, turning, nearly falling, being caught, laughing too hard, and pretending it was all intentional. Aldrin was pulled into the circle by Elswith, who informed him that travelers were required by ancient law to dance badly for local morale. "I don't know the steps," he protested. "Neither does half the village." "That is reassuring." "It should not be." She was correct. He stepped on someone's foot within moments, apologized to the wrong person, turned left when everyone turned right, and briefly collided with a man carrying soup. Miraculously, the soup survived. The man looked more surprised than offended. Then the rhythm caught him. Turn, step, clap. The well passed in and out of view as bodies moved around it. Faces glowed in firelight. Old divisions softened. Aldrin noticed two families sharing a bench, who, according to the Cooper, had not spoken properly in 15 years because of a boundary dispute involving 3 apple trees and 1 extremely persuasive goat. That evening, they sang the same old harvest verse and argued only about the correct ending. Progress, apparently, often looked like people disagreeing more gently. Later, Auric raised a cup. Only then did the village quiet. "This year," he said, "we remembered a song, 3 recipes, 5 names, 1 apology, and the proper way to mend the north fence." A murmur of laughter passed through the crowd. "The fence mattered," said the blacksmith. "It did," Auric agreed solemnly. He looked toward the well. "But let us not thank stone for what living hands must carry. The well returns. We must keep." People lowered their heads, not in worship, in agreement. Aldrin understood then that the feast was not celebration alone. It was preservation. Every song sung aloud was a thread tied against forgetting. Every recipe cooked again became stronger. Every shared story made the well less necessary. An eccentric custom closed the meal. Each person placed 1 crumb of bread on the well's rim. Not as an offering, Auric explained, but as a reminder that memory, like bread, went stale when hoarded. This seemed both poetic and likely attractive to birds. Sure enough, a sparrow swooped down almost immediately and stole a crumb with holy confidence. "Does that ruin the custom?" Aldrin asked. Marta smiled. "No, it improves it." When night settled fully, the villagers remained outside beneath the stars. Elswith sang her mother's restored lullaby softly to the children, though most of them were already asleep against their parents' knees. Aldrin sat apart near the oak, watching the fire burn low. He did not feel healed. That would have been too simple. But the memory of his brother no longer floated alone inside him. It had been placed among song, bread, laughter, and firelight. It had joined the world again. For the first time since drinking from the well, Aldrin whispered into the dark, "I remember you." The name still did not come, but somewhere in the quiet, that felt like a beginning. The feast ended gently. No one announced its conclusion. People simply drifted home in 2s and 3s, carrying empty bowls and sleepy children beneath a sky scattered with stars. The fires settled into glowing embers. Even the dogs seemed reluctant to bark, as though loud noises might disturb something precious that had settled over the village. Aldrin remained beneath the oak tree long after the square had emptied. The well stood alone once more. Its stones glimmered faintly with dew. He found himself wondering how many voices those old stones had heard over the centuries. Laughter, confessions, arguments, prayers, promises that had been kept, promises that had not. Water listened to all of them without choosing favorites. "You aren't sleeping." The voice belonged to Elswith. She approached carrying 2 steaming cups. "Herb tea," she explained. "Marta insists it encourages peaceful dreams." "Does it?" "No." She handed him one anyway. "It tastes respectable, though." Aldrin took a careful sip. "It tastes like a field became disappointed." Elswith laughed. "That's the nicest thing anyone has ever said about Marta's tea." They sat together in comfortable silence. Above them, the moon climbed slowly between scattered clouds. I keep thinking about my brother, Aldrin admitted. I imagined you would. I remember his smile clearly now, but not his name, he nodded. I thought remembering would make the emptiness smaller. Did it? In some places. And the others? They became deeper. Elswith looked thoughtfully into her cup. When I remembered my mother's second lullaby, she paused. I also remembered the last time she sang it. Aldrin turned toward her. I hadn't realized it was the night before she became ill. I'm sorry. So am I, she smiled faintly, but I also remembered how warm her hands were. A breeze stirred the leaves overhead. I had forgotten that warmth for years. She wrapped both hands around her cup. It surprised me. What did? How joy and sorrow returned together. Aldrin understood. The memory of his brother had brought laughter beside a river. It had also brought rain. Neither would come without the other. Perhaps memories refused to travel alone. The village finally fell asleep, or nearly all of it. Just before midnight, Aldrin awoke. At first he thought thunder had disturbed him. Then he realized it was singing, very soft, almost impossible to hear. He climbed quietly from the loft and stepped into the cool night. Moonlight silvered every rooftop. The singing drifted through the empty streets, not from one house, from many. A low melody, the same melody. He followed it toward the square. There he found Auric already waiting beside the well. You hear it too, the old man said. I thought I was dreaming. So did everyone else. As if to prove the point, lights began appearing behind cottage windows. Doors opened. Villagers emerged slowly, wrapped in blankets and cloaks. None looked frightened, only puzzled. Marta arrived, rubbing her eyes. The river, she murmured. I dreamed of standing beside a river. Elswith nodded. So did I. The bridge, said the cooper. There was an old bridge. A shepherd frowned, and children laughing. I heard birds, whispered the baker. No. An elderly woman shook her head gently. Swallows. Everyone looked at her. Yes, several voices answered almost together. Swallows. Aldrin felt the breath catch in his chest. His river, his bridge, his memory. Or, not entirely, his. Auric rested one hand upon the well. Tell me. The villagers spoke one after another. I saw a little boy skipping stones. I remember reeds moving in the wind. There was a fishing line, a dog chasing ducks. My grandmother was there. No, another replied softly. My grandfather. The details differed, yet they all shared the same place, the same sunlight, the same gentle river. No one understood how. The square filled with quiet conversation. Nobody argued. Nobody insisted their memory was correct. Instead, they listened, compared, added small pieces together, like repairing an old tapestry with threads found in different homes. Aldrin finally spoke. I know that river. The voices fell silent. I was there. He described the bridge. The crooked willow leaning over the bank, the shallow bend where children caught tiny fish. Every face around him grew thoughtful. The cooper blinked. I remember the willow. So do I, whispered Marta, but I've never seen it. Neither had the baker, nor Elswith, nor the shepherd, yet each remembered it. Auric closed his eyes. It has begun. Aldrin frowned. What has? The dreams. What dreams? The old guardian opened his eyes slowly. They come every few generations. Why? Because memory is rarely owned by one person. A deep silence followed. Auric continued. Families tell stories. Yes. Villages tell stories. Of course. But sometimes. He looked around at every face gathered beneath the moon. An entire place remembers. The idea seemed impossible, yet no one laughed, because each had dreamed the same river, the same sunlight, the same quiet happiness. An eccentric tale from neighboring valleys claimed that every village possessed an invisible memory woven from thousands of ordinary lives. Shepherds, bakers, children, widows, blacksmiths, all leaving tiny threads behind until the land itself remembered them. Most scholars dismiss the notion as charming nonsense. Farmers, however, often claimed that certain hills simply felt older than maps could explain. Standing in the moonlit square, Aldrin found the old belief strangely convincing. "What does it mean?" Elswith asked. Auric did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the well and looked into its dark water. "The dreams usually come before..." He stopped. "Before what?" "The hidden places wake." Aldrin exchanged uneasy glances with the others. "What hidden places?" The old man looked toward the center of the well. "There are paths beneath this village." "Beneath the well?" "Yes. I thought no one knew who built it." "No one does. Then who built the paths?" "I don't know." "Have you been below?" Auric hesitated. "Once." "And?" His voice became almost a whisper. "I found doors." "What was behind them?" "I never opened them." The villagers stared. "You never opened them?" "I was wiser then." A faint smile crossed his weathered face. Or perhaps more frightened. The moon slipped behind a passing cloud. For a brief moment, darkness settled across the square. Then, from somewhere far below the well, there came the unmistakable sound of stone grinding against stone. Slow, ancient, patient, as though a door, unopened for centuries, had begun to move. No one moved. The sound beneath the well faded slowly into the earth, leaving behind a silence so complete that even the village geese, professional enemies of peace, did not dare interrupt. Aldrin stood with the others beneath the cloud-covered moon, staring at the old stones. Then the baker cleared his throat. "Well," he said softly, "that sounded expensive." Nobody laughed at first. Then Marta did, just once, and the tension cracked enough for people to breathe again. Auric leaned heavily on his staff. "Back to your homes," he told the villagers. Several people began protesting at once. "You cannot expect us to sleep after that," said Elswith. "I do not expect sleep," Auric replied. "I expect blankets, lamps, rope, and fewer people falling into ancient holes before dawn." That proved persuasive. Within moments, the square stirred with anxious purpose. Lanterns were fetched. Coils of rope appeared from sheds. The blacksmith brought iron hooks, a hammer, and the expression of a man who had been waiting his entire life for someone to need iron hooks, urgently. Aldrin remained beside Auric. "You knew this might happen." "I knew it could." "That is not comforting." "Comfort was not my aim." "What was?" "Accuracy." The old man's face looked pale in the lantern light. By the time the villagers returned, the first hint of dawn had begun to silver the eastern hills. Auric chose only 5 to remain: Aldrin, Elswith, Marta, the blacksmith, and the cooper. The rest were sent away with firm instructions to keep children, animals, and heroic fools at a safe distance. This excluded very few people, but everyone pretended otherwise. The blacksmith secured a rope around the old well beam. The cooper tested the knots. Marta packed a satchel with candles, bread, dried apples, and a small bottle of vinegar. Because in medieval villages, vinegar was treated as a solution to nearly everything. Faintness, vinegar. Bad smell, vinegar. Suspicious mood, probably vinegar. Auric removed several loose stones from the inner wall of the well, revealing an iron ring hidden beneath moss. Aldrin stared. You knew that was there. Yes. And never mentioned it? It rarely improves conversation to begin with secret iron rings. Together, they pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then something shifted below. Stone scraped. A narrow section of the well's inner wall opened inward, revealing a dark passage cut into the earth. Cold air breathed out from below. It smelled of wet stone, old roots, and something faintly sweet, like flowers pressed between forgotten pages. Aldrin's skin prickled. Auric tied the rope around his waist. No, Aldrin said immediately. The old man raised one eyebrow. You are ancient, experienced. You nearly crack when standing. Only for emphasis. I'll go first. Auric looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. Do not step where stone shines green. Why? Because it is slippery. That was less mystical than expected. Death does not need poetry. Aldrin descended first. The rope slid through his hands as he lowered himself into the well shaft, boots finding narrow footholds carved into the damp stone. The darkness swallowed him gradually. Above, lantern light wavered around the rim. The hidden opening waited halfway down. He swung carefully into it, heart thudding. The passage was narrow but tall enough to walk hunched. Its walls were not natural. Someone had carved them long ago with patient tools, smoothing the stone until it resembled the inside of a buried throat. Elswith followed, then the blacksmith, Marta, the cooper, and finally Auric, lowered with more care and far more muttering. They lit candles. The passage stretched ahead, sloping downward. Along the walls were markings, circles, waves, closed eyes, open hands, and lines that resembled falling rain. Aldrin touched one symbol gently. It had been cut deep. Who made these? Auric shook his head. People who feared forgetting enough to build underground. They walked. Objects placed here did not feed the well. They anchored memory. They gave the past somewhere to rest outside fragile human minds. An odd marginal custom from distant monasteries came to him then. Some monks copied not only holy texts, but also household lists, lullabies, recipes, and village complaints, believing ordinary records might someday save a people's soul better than royal chronicles. Water dripped somewhere nearby. Every footstep echoed softly. After some distance, the passage widened into a chamber. Everyone stopped. The room was round, built directly beneath the village square. Its ceiling curved like the inside of a great bowl, supported by stone ribs carved with hundreds of tiny names. Some names were sharp and clear. Others had worn nearly smooth. At the center stood a shallow pool fed by a trickle of water flowing through a carved channel. The pool's surface was perfectly still. Around the walls were shelves. On them rested objects, thousands of them. Wooden toys, clay cups, rusty keys, locks of hair tied with thread, bone needles, broken knife handles, scraps of cloth, wedding rings, a cracked flute, a tiny shoe, a soldier's token. The dreams opened the way. To what? The old guardian's voice was barely audible. To whatever the village chose not to remember. From the dark archway, water began to trickle across the floor, slowly at first, then faster, and carried upon it, turning gently in the current, came a small black pebble marked with a pale stripe. Aldrin knew the pebble before he touched it. Not with certainty. A spoon with a burned handle. Ordinary things, sacred things, because someone had once loved them enough to keep them. Marta covered her mouth. Elswith whispered, "It's a sanctuary." Auric nodded slowly. "A memory house." The blacksmith lifted his lantern. There are more passages. Indeed, 3 archways opened from the chamber. Above each was carved a praise in old lettering. Oryx stepped closer, squinting. The given. He turned. The kept. And finally, above the darkest arch, the lost. Nobody spoke for a while. Aldrin approached the central pool. Unlike the well water above, this surface reflected no ceiling, no candlelight, no faces, only darkness. Then something flickered within it. A river, a bridge, a boy with dark curls. Aldrin stepped back sharply. Elswith caught his arm. "What did you see?" "My brother." The pool stilled again. Oryx's expression grew grave. "This place is older than the well as we know it." The Cooper examined the shelves. "Are these offerings?" "No," Marta said softly. "Not offerings." She lifted a small wooden horse from a shelf, turning it with reverence. "Witnesses." Aldrin understood at once. Aldrin had once laughed at the idea of preserving arguments about lentils. Now, in that hidden chamber, he understood. Even lentils could hold a life. A low sound moved through the sanctuary. Not grinding stone this time. A hum. The shelves trembled faintly. From the archway marked the lost, a cool wind slipped into the chamber. One candle went out, then another. Oryx turned toward Aldrin, with something older and less polite than certainty. It came drifting across the thin sheet of water, turning once, twice, then resting against his boot as though it had traveled a very long way, simply to accuse him of being late. He bent slowly and picked it up. Black stone, pale stripe, smooth as river glass. His fingers closed around it. The hidden chamber seemed to inhale. Then the water in the central pool trembled, and letters appeared beneath its surface, not written in ink, but in ripples of light. Oryx stepped close, face drawn. "Read them." Aldrin swallowed. "I can't." "Yes, you can." The strange marks shifted. At first, they meant nothing. Then, as though memory itself leaned forward, the letters became words. Not in the language Aldrin had learned on roads. From strangers who would never know what had gone missing. That was the cruelest part. A fair bargain requires 2 open hands. This had none. The pool brightened again. A new line appeared. Memory is not owned. Memory is carried. Aldrin laughed once, bitterly. That sounds beautiful enough to hide something ugly. Most dangerous truths do, Oryx said. From the archway marked the lost. Older, still known somehow. Every memory returned as drawn from another shadow. Elswith whispered, "What does that mean?" Oryx did not answer. More words formed. What rises here sinks elsewhere. What is reclaimed must be released. Marta made the sign her mother had taught her against ill fortune. The blacksmith frowned. "So the well takes?" "The well balances," Oryx said softly. "That sounds like taking with nicer boots." Aldrin stared into the pool. Another vision flickered. The shepherd, remembering his wife's freckles. Then somewhere far away, an old woman pausing at a table, confused, unable to recall why she had entered the room. Elswith's mother's lullaby returned. Elsewhere, a young man forgot the tune his daughter used to sing while washing wool. Aldrin's brother's face rose from darkness. And in another place, unseen, unknown, a child forgot the exact shape of a beloved dog's ears. The chamber tilted around him. "No," Aldrin said. The word sounded small. Oryx's expression was heavy with grief. "I feared this." "You knew?" "I suspected. You let people drink. I did not know the cost reached beyond us. But you suspected." Oryx closed his eyes. "Yes." The answer struck harder because it was honest. The blacksmith stepped forward. "Then we seal it." With what? Auric asked. Stone? Iron? Anger? If needed. And if memories already loosened return twisted? If forgetting floods rather than trickles? The blacksmith fell silent. Marta looked at the shelves, at all the little anchored lives. How long has this been happening? Auric shook his head. Perhaps always. Aldrin gripped the pebble until its edge bit into his palm. His brother's smile. Elswith's lullaby. The shepherd's freckles. All gifts. All stolen, perhaps. Water continued flowing. More objects drifted forward. A brass button, a strip of blue ribbon, a cracked bead, a feather darkened by age. Each object carried a flicker. Faces, voices, doors closing, hands waving goodbye. 1,000 fragments, not all belonging to anyone present. Elswith knelt beside the water. If every memory costs another, why would anyone build this? Marta answered before Auric could. Desperation. Everyone looked at her. She held the little wooden horse she had lifted from the shelf. People who had lost too much might have decided any return was worth any price. That is monstrous, said the cooper. It is human, Marta replied sadly. Those words filled the chamber more completely than the cold water. An eccentric belief from old burial fields claimed that mourners should never speak the dead person's name while crossing a bridge, because water might carry it away and give it to someone else in a dream. Aldrin had once considered that superstition charmingly ridiculous. Now, ankle-deep in an underground sanctuary that seemed powered by sorrow and poor consent, he decided perhaps medieval grandmothers had been better philosophers than half the priests he had met. Auric moved toward the arch marked the Given. I need to see the inscriptions there, Aldrin followed. The passage beyond was lined with carved tablets. Some had cracked, some were filmed with mineral deposits. Auric wiped one with his sleeve and read aloud. When famine took the names of the buried, we asked the water to return them. Another tablet. When war scattered children beyond the hills, we asked the water to keep their mothers' faces bright. Another. When shame silenced the living, we asked the deep to speak. Elswith's voice trembled. They weren't greedy. No, Auric said. Not at first. The tablets continued. At the beginning, the well had served as a storehouse. People placed memories into objects willingly, a song sung into cloth, a name whispered into stone, a farewell spoken over water. Later generations, desperate to recover what had not been given, demanded more. The balance changed. The well began drawing from wherever memory was weak, from the old, from the grieving, from strangers sleeping beneath distant roofs, from children too young to guard their own remembering. Aldrin felt sick, not because the magic was evil, because it was familiar. People often took from unseen hands when their own hearts hurt badly enough. The cooper muttered, So every miracle has been a debt. Perhaps not every, Auric said, but enough. Aldrin looked down at the pebble. His brother had given it to him, an anchor. He had lost it, or hidden it, or surrendered it somehow to forgetting. Now it had returned through the lost. What does it want from me? He asked. The pool answered, not with words this time, with memory, rain, mud, his brother pushing the pebble into his palm. Keep it. Then another fragment, one Aldrin had not seen before. Aldrin, still a child, stumbling through dark woods after the attack. He reached a stream. He fell. The pebble slipped from his fingers into rushing water. He screamed for it, not because it was stone, because it was proof. A proof that someone had loved him enough to give him something before letting him go. The memory faded. Aldrin stood shaking. Auric touched his shoulder. The well returned the anchor. At whose cost? No one answered, because no one could. That was the horror, not blood, not monsters, uncertainty. Somewhere, perhaps, someone had just misplaced a tiny kindness. The water from the lost reached the central pool and swirled around it. The inscriptions glowed faintly across the chamber walls. Aldrin understood the choice before anyone said it. They could keep using the well. They could pretend not to know. They could argue that the village deserved comfort, that others forgot things naturally anyway, that one recovered mother's voice outweighed one stranger's missing tune. People had built entire kingdoms on uglier reasoning, or they could stop and lose whatever else waited in the dark. His brother's name, his father's face, his own beginning. The pebble warmed in his hand. Elswith looked at him, eyes wet. What do we do? Aldrin wanted to say he didn't know, but that would be only partly true. Deep inside, beneath longing and fear, and the ache of almost remembering, something clear had begun to settle. He closed his fingers around the pebble. We stop asking the well to take. The chamber became still. Even the water seemed to listen. No one answered Aldrin at first. The words remained in the underground chamber like a candle flame. Everyone was afraid to breathe near. We stop asking the well to take. It sounded simple, dangerously simple. The kind of simple that usually meant someone would shortly need rope, courage, and perhaps a shovel. Medieval solutions loved pretending to be tidy until the mud arrived. The blacksmith crossed his arms. And how exactly do we tell an ancient well to behave? Firmly? The cooper suggested. Elswith gave him a look. What? It works on apprentices sometimes. Not on ancient wells. We have not tested it. Marta stepped closer to the central pool, where the glowing letters had faded into dark water. It may not need commands, she said. It may need release. Auric watched her carefully. Explain. She held up the little wooden horse. These objects are anchors. Some were given willingly. Some may be holding what should have gone onward. Aldrin understood. You think the well kept too much. I think grief kept too much, Marta said softly. The well only learned from us. That was worse than blaming magic. Magic could be cursed, sealed, buried, avoided. But if the trouble had grown from human longing, then every person in the village carried a thread of it. They returned to the chamber marked the given and read more inscriptions. Many were tender. A mother preserving her child's first word. A widower giving his wife's favorite song so their grandchildren might learn it. A farmer speaking the names of famine, dead into a cup before placing it on the shelf. Then the writing changed. A later hand, sharper cuts, less reverence, more demand. Return what was denied. Restore what was hidden. Let no sorrow remain unanswered. Elswith shivered. That sounds like a prayer. No, Auric said. It sounds like hunger. Aldrin looked toward the arch, marked the lost. Cold water still trickled from it, winding across the floor like a silver thread. Somewhere beyond that dark passage waited his brother's name. He knew it, not because anyone had said so, because longing had a scent now, sharp and sweet, and it came from that darkness. All he needed to do was walk forward, ask, take. Perhaps one stranger somewhere would forget a childhood song. Perhaps an old man would lose the memory of rain on his wedding day. Perhaps nothing important. That was how temptation spoke. It made theft sound tidy. Aldrin turned away, barely, but he turned. We should go back up, he said. The blacksmith frowned. Without exploring? Without taking more. We still do not know how to stop it. Then we start by telling everyone the truth. Auric's shoulders sank. That, Aldrin realized, was the choice the old guardian had feared most. Not the chamber, not the inscriptions, not even the cost. The telling. By late morning, the village gathered in the square. People stood around the well in uneasy silence. Children were kept close. The objects brought from below remained wrapped in cloth on a table. The horse, the ribbon, the button, the bead, and Aldrin's black pebble with its pale stripe. Auric spoke first. His voice was old but steady. He told them about the chamber, the shelves, the inscriptions, the balance. He did not spare himself. I suspected there was a cost, he said. I did not know how far it reached. I should have sought the truth sooner. No one shouted. That was almost harder. A woman began crying quietly. The shepherd who had remembered his wife's freckles stared at his hands. Elswith stood beside Aldrin, pale but upright. Then the questions came. So my mother's song was stolen? Did my child forget because I remembered? Can we return them? What have we done? The square filled with grief, fear, guilt, and anger, all speaking over one another like geese at a royal council. Marta climbed onto a bench. Enough. Somehow everyone quieted. Marta was the sort of woman who could command silence from thunder if thunder had been raised properly. We did not know, she said. Now we know. Shame may visit, but it does not get to unpack and live here. A small laugh broke through tears. We will not drink from the well for returned memory, she continued. Not until we understand how to give without taking. And if that day never comes, then never. The word never struck the village like a bell. Aldrin felt it too. Never meant his brother's name might remain lost. Never meant his father's face might stay behind mist. Never meant choosing an emptiness because filling it might empty someone else. A curious village practice followed difficult announcements. Everyone present picked up a small stone and held it until the first person laughed, cried, or spoke honestly. The custom supposedly began after a reeve once gave such a dull harvest speech that 3 people fell asleep standing. Holding stones kept them awake. Over time, it became something stranger and kinder. That morning, every villager took a stone. For a long while, no one spoke. Then the shepherd stepped forward. I will keep the freckles, he said, voice shaking, but I will not ask for more. Elswith followed. I will sing my mother's lullaby, she said, so it lives here honestly. The baker wiped floury hands on his apron. I remember a recipe that may have cost someone dearly, he said, so I will teach it freely and feed anyone who comes hungry. One by one, the villagers spoke. Not perfect answers, not clean absolution, just decisions. Small, human, trembling. Aldrin stepped forward last. He placed the black pebble on the well's rim. My brother gave me this, he said. The village listened. I forgot him because I was young and frightened. The well returned his face. I want his name. His voice nearly broke. I want it more than I can say. He looked into the dark mouth of the well. But I will not take it from someone who never agreed to lose. The pebble trembled, only slightly, perhaps from wind, perhaps not. Then, from somewhere below, the water gave one soft sound. Not a splash, not a whisper, more like a sigh. The well did not glow. No miracle burst upward. No ancient curse shattered dramatically, which was mildly disappointing from a storytelling perspective, but probably healthier for everyone nearby. Instead, the village stood together in the quiet, and for the first time since Aldrin had arrived, no one touched the well in greeting as they passed. Not from hatred, from restraint. By evening, a wooden cover had been placed over the well mouth, not sealed, covered. There was a difference. A sealed thing is denied. A covered thing is respected. Aldrin sat beside it as sunset burned low across the fields. Auric joined him with difficulty, lowering himself onto the stones. "You chose well," the old man said. "I chose pain." "Often, neighbors." Aldrin looked at him. "Do you regret not asking for your name?" "Every day." "That does not help." "No. But it is true." The old guardian placed a hand over his blank bone disc. "Some mysteries remain not because we are weak, but because kindness requires us to leave them closed." Aldrin watched the sky darken. Beneath the wooden cover, the well was silent. No longer inviting, no longer offering, just waiting. And perhaps that was mercy too. For 3 days, no one drank from the well for memory. They still drew water. That was the awkward part. A village could grow morally complicated about ancient magic, but people still needed to boil turnips. The well remained useful in the plainest possible way, which made avoiding it entirely impossible. It stood in the square with its wooden cover, looking less like a doorway to forgotten sorrow and more like a very smug bucket station. At first, the villagers behaved carefully, too carefully. People lowered buckets in silence, filled pails, and left without glancing down. Children were told not to linger. Old songs paused whenever someone came too near the stones. Even the dogs seemed confused by the new seriousness and sniffed around the well as if trying to determine whether it had committed a crime. But after the 3rd day, unease began to sour. The shepherd forgot where he had placed his knife and stared at the well as if it had personally hidden it. The baker burned 2 trays of barley cakes and muttered that he had been clearer-headed before. A young mother wept because she could not remember the exact pattern her grandmother used to embroider winter sleeves. No one said, "Let us drink," not directly. Instead, they circled the thought. Perhaps one small asking would not harm. Perhaps if the memory is already ours. Perhaps the well understands now. Perhaps became the most dangerous word in the village. Aldrin noticed because he felt it too. Every morning he woke with the shape of his brother's face bright behind his eyes and the empty space where the name should be. The gap bothered him like a loose tooth. He pressed at it with thought again and again, knowing it would hurt, doing it anyway, because people are ridiculous creatures and rarely leave sore places alone. On the 4th evening, the well went silent. Not ordinary silent. It had always been quiet. This was different. The water no longer echoed when buckets struck it. The rope descended, the bucket vanished below, and nothing answered. When drawn up, the water was clear and cold, but every villager felt the absence. The cooper described it best. "It feels like speaking to someone who has turned their chair away." Auric listened, grave and tired. By sunset, everyone gathered in the square. Marta removed the wooden cover. Aldrin expected darkness. Instead, he saw water lying far below, still as black glass. Elswith lowered a cup, drank, closed her eyes, and waited. Nothing happened. No song, no warmth, no hidden sorrow rising, only water. She opened her eyes. "It gives nothing." A murmur passed through the crowd. Some sounded relieved, others frightened. The shepherd stepped forward, trembling. "My wife's freckles," he whispered. "Will I lose them again?" "No," Auric said. "You do not know that." The old man bowed his head. "No, I do not." Fear spread then, gentle but quick. People clutched restored memories like lanterns in wind. The baker began reciting the barley cake. Recipe aloud, over and over, while 2 children repeated it after him as if it were holy scripture. Marta gathered women together to sing every remembered verse from the feast. The blacksmith scratched his restored fence measurements into a plank, which was practical, if not exactly lyrical. By nightfall, the village had become a hive of preservation. Stories were spoken, names were written, songs were sung until voices cracked. No one trusted the mind alone anymore. Aldrin sat with Elswith near the oak tree as she taught 3 girls her mother's lullaby. One girl kept changing the final note. Elswith corrected her twice, then stopped. "My mother changed it too," she said softly. The girl smiled, and there it was. Memory becoming alive instead of trapped. Not exact, not polished, carried. A peculiar old practice emerged from Marta's childhood. Memory knots. Each person tied knots into cords, one knot for each thing they wished to remember, then spoke the memory aloud while pulling it tight. Sailors used such cords for winds, shepherds for lamb counts, and absent-minded husbands for errands they forgot anyway. By midnight, half the village wore knotted strings around their wrists. Aldrin tied one knot. My brother laughed at tiny fish. He tied another. He called me Wren, a third. He gave me a black stone. His hands shook before the fourth. He told me to run. He could not tie the fifth. Elswith sat beside him without speaking. That helped more than advice would have. The next morning, the dependency became clearer. Without the well's gifts, the villagers seemed forced to notice how much they had stopped doing for themselves. Fewer stories had been told because the well might return them. Fewer recipes had been taught because the water could restore them. Fewer apologies had been spoken because perhaps, someday, memory would soften the need. The well had become not merely a wonder, it had become an excuse. That realization embarrassed everyone, which made the village irritable. The baker snapped at the cooper. The cooper snapped at the blacksmith. The blacksmith snapped at a horse, which ignored him with professional calm. Marta finally declared a day of remembering without magic. Every household had to bring one memory that needed no well. At noon they gathered in the square, not around the well, around the tables. A woman remembered how her father sneezed every time he cut mint. A boy remembered the day he fell into a rain barrel and claimed he had been attacked by the moon. The blacksmith remembered his first horseshoe, which had been so crooked his master hung it above the forge, to frighten better iron into obedience. Slowly, laughter returned. Not the bright laughter of the feast. Something humbler. Aldrin listened and understood what Auric had meant. The well returned, but people had to keep. And keeping was work. Tender work. Annoying work. Daily work. That evening, Aldrin approached the silent well alone. He placed his palm on the stone. No pulse answered. No whisper. No memory. "I still want his name," he admitted. The water below remained dark. "But I remember enough to love him." The words surprised him. Enough. Not everything. Enough. Behind him, Auric's voice said, "That is a hard lesson." Aldrin turned. The old guardian leaned on his staff beneath the fading light. "Does it ever become easier?" "No. You are terrible at comfort. I have cultivated the skill." Aldrin looked once more into the well. It had ceased granting memories. Yet the village was noisier now with remembering than it had ever been. Perhaps silence had not been punishment. Perhaps it had been instruction. A well could return what was forgotten. But only living voices could decide what deserved to remain. The village did not heal all at once. That would have been suspicious. Healing, in Aldrin's experience, behaved less like sunrise and more like a stubborn donkey approaching a puddle, slow, doubtful, and likely to stop in the middle for reasons no one could respect. But the change began, not with the well, with doors. People started opening them. The first was the baker, who carried a tray of barley cakes to the cooper's house after snapping at him the day before. He arrived looking deeply uncomfortable, which made the apology more believable. "I was sharp," the baker said. "You were burnt around the edges," the cooper replied. "That is bread language." It seemed appropriate. They stood in silence. Then the cooper took a cake. "It needs more honey." "It does not." "It absolutely does." By evening, they were arguing warmly over the recipe, which everyone agreed counted as reconciliation. The second door opened when the two apple tree families met beside the boundary stones dividing their gardens. For 15 years, no one had clearly remembered who first planted the disputed trees, though everyone had remembered being offended about it with impressive accuracy. Without the well to settle the past, they had to discuss the present. This proved painful. There were old accusations, long pauses. One goat wandered between them and chewed a legal-looking scrap of parchment, thereby improving the document considerably. Finally, Marta suggested they divide the harvest each autumn and let the trees belong to shade, bees, and anyone short enough to steal fallen fruit without being noticed. Children immediately supported this arrangement, so did the goat, indirectly. By the third day, the village began making what Auric called living anchors, not objects hidden underground, not memories locked away in darkness. Living anchors were shared practices, songs sung weekly, stories told at supper, recipes taught by hand, names spoken during planting, jokes repeated until children groaned, especially jokes. Aldrin discovered that bad jokes endured better than solemn speeches. A solemn speech needed proper timing, dignity, and listeners with clean sleeves. A bad joke needed only one uncle with confidence. That made it practically immortal. Elswith began teaching her mother's lullaby each evening, not as a sacred relic, as a song. Children changed words. Mothers hummed it while washing bowls. A shepherd adapted it into something about sheep wandering into turnip fields, which offended Elswith for nearly 4 breaths before she laughed. The song survived by becoming less perfect. That lesson settled deep in Aldrin. Perfection preserved nothing. Use did. Marta organized memory suppers. Every household hosted another and shared one story tied to the meal. It could be grand, humble, foolish, embarrassing, or entirely about cheese. In fact, one of the most beloved evenings concerned a great-aunt who once hid an entire wheel of cheese during a tax inspection and forgot where she put it until summer warmth revealed the location in a manner described only as aggressive. This became a village classic immediately. Aldrin attended these suppers quietly at first. He listened more than he spoke. But one night, sitting beneath low rafters while rain tapped the roof, someone asked him about the river. He almost refused. Then he remembered his own words beside the well. Enough to love him. So he told them, not everything, only the gentle part. He described the tiny fish, the stolen line, his brother calling it borrowing badly. The table laughed softly. The phrase borrowing badly passed around the village within 2 days and became the preferred description for children caught stealing apples, men taking tools without asking, and one hen repeatedly entering the baker's storehouse. Aldrin's brother, unnamed, became part of village speech. Not fully restored, but carried. And strangely, that did not feel like losing him. It felt like giving him room to breathe. Auric changed too. The old guardian stopped sitting alone by the well so often. He began visiting homes, listening to stories before they faded, and asking children to repeat names back to him in ridiculous voices so they would remember them better. One afternoon, Aldrin found him teaching a girl to carve symbols into a wooden cup. "That one means memory?" Aldrin asked. "No," Oryx said. "What does it mean?" "Do not leave soup near cats." The girl nodded solemnly. "A vital ancestral warning." "Extremely vital," Oryx agreed. An eccentric custom soon returned from the hidden chamber inscriptions, the bowl of first telling. Whenever something important happened, a birth, a marriage, a farewell, even the successful repair of a roof after 3 failed attempts, the people present spoke the event into a bowl of water. Then they poured the water at the roots of the oak tree, not to store memory and magic, to bind it to place, to say, "This happened here, among us, and we will remember by returning." The well remained silent, but its silence no longer felt like refusal. It felt like rest. The villagers still drew water for cooking, washing, brewing, and the endless medieval need to make cabbage into something almost cheerful. Yet no one asked it for what belonged to another unseen life. At times, grief returned. The shepherd woke one morning afraid the freckles had faded. His daughter sat with him until he could describe them again. 3 on the left side of the nose, 2 near the cheek, 1 tiny one above the lip. They repeated them together, not desperately, tenderly. Elswith sometimes forgot a line of the lullaby and smiled instead of panicking. Marta kept a record of recipes using charcoal marks on smoothboards, though she admitted her drawings of herbs all looked like frightened spiders. Aldrin tied more knots into his cord. Some days he touched the 5th empty place and still could not speak. That was all right. Not every knot had to close at once. One evening, after a long day repairing a collapsed sheep pen, Aldrin sat beside Oryx beneath the oak. The square glowed with lamplight. Children chased one another in circles around the covered well, not fearfully, not carelessly, simply living near it. "That," Oryx said, "is balance." Aldrin watched a little boy trip, roll, stand, and declare the ground guilty. "It looks messy." "It is. I expected balance to look calmer." "Only statues are balanced calmly. Living things wobble." Aldrin smiled. Across the square, Elswith began singing. Others joined gradually. The melody lifted into the evening, imperfect and warm. The well listened. The oak listened. The village listened to itself. And Aldrin, who had spent years walking away from places before they could ask anything of him, remained seated beneath the branches as darkness gathered softly around the roofs. For once, staying did not feel like being trapped. It felt like being remembered. The first sign that something had changed in Aldrin did not arrive as memory. It arrived as sleep. For weeks after the well fell silent, his dreams had been fragments, river water without faces, laughter without mouths, roads without beginning or end. They came like half-finished songs played on broken instruments. But on the night after the village's memory, supper celebrating the repaired sheep pen, something different happened. He dreamed in sequence, not fragments, not echoes, a story. He stood again beside the river. The willow leaned over the water, just as before, but now its branches moved in a wind that felt intentional, as though the tree had learned patience. His brother was there. Wren. The name came without resistance this time, like a door that had finally stopped pretending to be locked. They were older, not children now, but not yet the men they would become. The river smelled the same, clean, bright, alive. "You stayed," Wren said. Aldrin tried to respond, but the dream tightened like cloth over a wound. I tried, he said. I know, Ren replied gently. That was new. Understanding, where there had once only been absence. They walked along the riverbank together. The bridge appeared ahead, repaired now, stronger than memory suggested it had ever been. Aldrin stopped. Is this real? He asked. Ren smiled. It is yours. That is not the same. It is enough. The wind shifted. The water below them carried sound, not speech, not memory being stolen or returned, but something softer, continuing, living. You are not gone, Aldrin said suddenly. I am not here either, Ren replied. That makes no sense. It makes feeling. Aldrin laughed once, and it hurt in a way that was not unpleasant. They sat on the bank. For a moment, nothing important happened, which in dreams often means everything important is already complete. Then Ren spoke again. You cannot take me back from where I am, he said. I know, but you can stop carrying me like a wound. Aldrin looked at him sharply. I don't know how. Ren tilted his head. You already started. The river moved. The willow bent. The world began to thin. Will I forget you again? Aldrin asked quickly. Ren hesitated. That depends, he said. On what? On whether you keep me only in pain. Aldrin wanted to answer, but the dream softened. The river brightened, and Ren stepped backward, not leaving, not disappearing, but becoming part of the place itself. You'll forget the sharp edges, he said. That is not forgetting, Aldrin replied. It is survival. Then he was gone. Aldrin woke with tears already drying on his face. For a long time, he did not move. The village outside his window was still dark, the kind of pre-dawn silence that belongs only to sleeping places and unfinished thoughts. He placed a hand over his chest. The emptiness was still there, but it was different, no longer hollow, shaped, like something had settled into it rather than been removed from it. When he stepped outside, the air was cold enough to sharpen breath. He found Auric already awake, sitting on the well's wooden cover. You dreamed, the old man said. It wasn't like before. Good. Why is that good? Because the well no longer feeds it. Aldrin frowned. I thought dreams were mine. Auric nodded slowly. They are, but they are also shaped by what we are willing to carry. They sat in silence for a while. Aldrin watched the horizon lighten. I think I'm beginning to understand him differently, he said. Your brother. Yes. Tell me. Aldrin searched for words. He was not just someone I lost. That is usually how memory begins, Auric said. He was someone I was becoming. Auric considered that. Yes. Aldrin looked down at his hands. And I think I was angry at myself for not being able to follow him properly. Ah. But I don't feel only that anymore. What else? Aldrin hesitated. Gratitude, he said, surprised by the word as it formed. For having been there at all. Auric nodded once. That is a dangerous kind of healing. Why? Because it does not erase pain. Aldrin gave a small, tired laugh. I've noticed. The village began to wake. Smoke rose from chimneys. Someone dropped a pan. A dog barked at absolutely nothing in particular, as dogs do when they feel the world is structurally correct. Elswith appeared in the square, hair unbraided, singing softly to herself to remember a line. She stopped when she saw Aldrin. You look different, she said. I dreamed properly, he replied. That sounds suspicious. It felt honest. She joined him on the well cover. For a while, neither spoke. Then she said, I think my mother would like the way we sing her song now. Even with the wrong notes, especially with them. Aldrin smiled. That feels like a lesson disguised as music. Most good things are. They sat together as the village fully woke. Life continued, not dramatically, not miraculously, just steadily. Later that day, a strange proposal began circulating among the villagers. It started with the cooper, who suggested building a second well. Not for memory, just water, a backup. Because, as he explained, even emotionally complicated wells should not be our only plumbing strategy. The idea spread quickly. Marta proposed something else entirely, a memory path, where each stone marked a shared story. Children could walk it and learn not by magic, but by repetition and presence. The blacksmith suggested reinforcing the old well's structure, just in case it ever becomes philosophical again. Nobody quite knew what that meant, but everyone agreed it sounded reasonable. Auric listened to all of it with a faint, tired smile. And Aldrin realized something quietly settling inside him. The village was no longer revolving around what it might receive. It was building what it chose to keep. That evening, he returned to the well alone. The wooden cover had been removed earlier for maintenance. The water below was calm, ordinary. He looked into it. No visions rose, no pull, only reflection. His own face, older than when he arrived, softer around the eyes, less empty. He placed his hand on the stone. "I still don't know your name," he said quietly to the memory of his brother. The water did not answer, but the silence no longer felt like loss. It felt like listening. And for the first time since arriving in the village, Aldrin did not feel as though something inside him was missing its way home, only that it had finally learned how to walk beside him. Spring arrived slowly in the village, as if it too needed time to decide whether it trusted what had changed. The river nearby swelled with thawing snow. Fields softened into green again. The air stopped biting and began, reluctantly, to warm. Even the wind seemed less interested in arguments. The well remained only a well. Stone. Water. Nothing more demanding than thirst. Yet no one treated it as ordinary. Not anymore. Aldrin stood near it each morning now, not because it called him, but because he had learned the difference between being pulled and choosing to stay close. He no longer feared what lay beneath it, nor did he desire it. That, he realized, was the truest balance. Elswith joined him one morning carrying bread wrapped in cloth. "You're here early," she said. "So are you." I woke up remembering a verse incorrectly. That sounds like a village emergency. It was urgent to me. They sat on the well's edge, breaking bread into uneven pieces. For a while, they did not speak of memory. Instead, they spoke of small things. Weather that could not decide what it wanted. A goat that had begun following the blacksmith for reasons no one could explain. A child who insisted. Beetles were secretly aristocrats. Normal things, necessary things. Aldrin noticed something then. He could still feel his brother, not as a sharp absence, not as a recovered image, but as presence woven into him in quieter ways. The way laughter sometimes arrived before thought. The way rivers now meant more than direction. The way silence no longer frightened him. He had not regained everything, and he would not, but he no longer needed to. Later that day, Auric called him to the oak tree. The old guardian looked smaller than he had at first meeting, though Aldrin suspected he had always been that size, and only appeared larger when carrying too many questions. "I am leaving," Auric said. Aldrin blinked. "Leaving?" "Yes." "For how long?" Auric considered. "Probably until I stop walking." "That is not reassuring." "It is accurate." The old man tapped his blank bone disc once, The village does not need me as it once did. That sounds like a good thing. It is. And yet I have been here a long time without remembering where I began. Aldrin understood. In a way, he had begun to understand that kind of wandering too. Not roads, not distance, but identity, slowly loosening from its old bindings. "Will you come back?" Aldrin asked. "Perhaps," Auric said. "That is your favorite answer. It is the only honest one I have left." They stood together beneath the oak. The village moved around them, unhurried. Children laughed near the square. Someone was teaching the memory path idea using stones and enthusiastic hand gestures that involved far more pointing than necessary. Marta argued with the blacksmith about whether philosophical reinforcement required additional nails. Elswith sang quietly while mending cloth, the lullaby now imperfect in a way that felt entirely right. Auric turned to Aldrin. "You are no longer lost," he said. Aldrin thought about that. "I don't feel found." That is better. Why? Because being found suggests someone else did the work. Aldrin smiled. "So what am I?" Auric looked at him for a long moment. "Carried," he said. The word settled gently. Not as burden, not as cure, as continuity. Aldrin watched the village breathe. "I still don't have his name," he said softly. "I know. Will I ever? Perhaps not in the way you first wanted." Aldrin nodded. "I think I understand that now." Auric adjusted his cloak. "Good. Where will you go first?" The old man looked toward the road beyond the village. "I will find places where people are forgetting too quickly," he said, "or remembering too painfully. There are always such places." "And you'll help them?" "I will listen," Auric corrected. "Help is often just listening for long enough." Aldrin considered that. Then he reached into his pocket and took out the black pebble with the pale stripe. Auric glanced at it. "You kept it." "I thought about returning it." "And?" "I think it belongs to the story now, not the loss." He placed it gently on the well rim. "Not as offering, not as sacrifice, as acknowledgement." Auric nodded once. "That is wise." "I'm not sure I agree." "Wisdom rarely seeks agreement." Aldrin laughed quietly. They stood a while longer. Then Auric stepped back. "It is time." Aldrin felt something tighten briefly in his chest. Not grief, not fear. Something simpler. Departure. "Take care," he said. Auric raised an eyebrow. "I am famously difficult to damage." "That is not what I meant." "I know." The old man turned, then paused. Without looking back, he said, "If you ever forget who you are again, do not ask only what you lost." Aldrin listened. "Ask what remained." Then Auric walked away down the road, slow, steady, not disappearing, just becoming distance. Aldrin watched until he was gone. Then he turned back to the village. The well stood beside him, silent, ordinary, faithful in its silence now. Elswith waved from across the square. Someone was laughing near the oak. The world continued, as it always had, but Aldrin no longer felt like someone passing through it. He rested his hand on the stone one last time. Not to take, not to ask, only to remember what it meant to stay without needing to become empty to do so. Above him, clouds drifted across a widening blue sky. And somewhere inside him, where a name had once been missing, there was now something quieter, not filled, not erased, but held. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough.